Patrick was an only child. He was raised in a small country village off the western shores of Great Britain. He was blessed to have conscientious parents. They were hardworking and they served in the community. They wanted to raise Patrick to be a good-natured, upright, and honest boy. They attended church regularly and they helped with the poor and the needy. Patrick's life was sleepy and quiet, peaceful country lifestyle. Everything about it was beautiful and good, brimming like a calm cup of tea in the evening with hope for the future. But this came to a startling end when he was 16 years of age. The King of Ireland, Niall of the Nine Hostages, sent a ship of marauding pirates to his village, and under the cover of the night, the pirates pillaged and plundered the homes. They stormed into Patrick's house, and they tore him from his bed, and then they bound him and loaded him on their ship with a number of other captives. They would take him to Ireland to be sold as a slave. Patrick was terrified of being alone in a foreign country. He was worried for his parents, wondering what happened to them in the raid. When he got to Ireland, an Irish rancher bought him to tend to his cattle and sheep. This meant that Patrick's job would be to wander the green clover mountain valleys of Ireland to watch over the rancher's sheep and cattle. It was to be done without company. He was not given any clothes or food. He had to provide for himself. And at night he would roll out a simple roll-up bed that he carried on his back to sleep under the vast stars. Although he was in complete solitude and isolation, he was not lonely. He talked to himself often. And he chattered with his animals and he whistled with the birds. But most importantly, he prayed to his God. He prayed more than 100 times a day. He shared with him his fears, his worries for his parents, and for the hopes of his own future. And in those cold nights, when it felt like there was nothing between him and the air, it was the warm embers of God's love that carried him through. Patrick completed 6 years of this isolation and solitude before something unusual occurred to him. One afternoon, he was up on a ridge, watching over the sheep in the pastures below. He lay down in the grass and stared up at the puffy white clouds above when he drifted off into a deep sleep. Suddenly, black ravens attacked him. They swarmed around him like terrible mosquitoes, and the more he tried to wave them off, the more of them came. They pecked at his face and they scratched at his skin. Pretty soon, the entire blue sky was covered with the black birds. His heart was full of fear and loneliness, so much so that he fell to the earth in desperation and he started to sob. But as he did so, a miracle happened. Thousands of white doves poured out down through the blackbirds. And as they fluttered down toward him, the blackbirds dispersed over the earth and fled. and from the clouds descended a beautiful angel and came down until he stood before Patrick and said, "Fear not, I am Victor, your guardian angel. I have come here to send you a message. It is time for you to return to your family. They are well and healthy. A ship is now ready for you in the sea." But Patrick hesitated. How could he leave? He said. I don't even know what direction the sea is in. And if I leave these sheep, my master will soon find out and send dogs after me to hunt me down and to kill me. And the angel said, "Go toward the rising sun each morning. No beast, no man will find you. And you will arrive safely back to your parents again." The angel rose up into the heavens as the birds dispersed and fled. Patrick opened his eyes and he awoke. He felt the earth around him and he stared up at the puffy white clouds above him, and he could see the meandering sheep below grazing in the grass. Everything seemed normal, except for what was in his mind. He was excited, but all he could think about was going home. How wonderful it would be, he thought, if this dream came true. If he could return to his parents and they were well and healthy. How wonderful it would be to sleep in a warm bed and to have a warm meal. That night, when he went to sleep, he stared at the sky. He could not sleep. And a warm, comforting feeling swept over him, reassuring him that he would be safe if he left. And so the next morning when he woke up with courage, he rolled up his bedding, packed up the few belongings he had, and then he went to each of his sheep and cows and told him goodbye. And as he left, he followed the rising sun. The rising sun for many, many days and mornings. He traveled for many miles. It was hard and it was arduous work. He relied on God for his safety and for his sustenance. He traveled for more than 200 miles, not knowing where he was going. Finally, he reached the blue sea, and there in the harbor was a ship that was chartered to go to Great Britain, just as the angel had said. With confidence, he ran to the ship. He joined some sailors that were loading along the gangplank. But as he started to load, the captain of the ship stopped him. "Do you have a boarding pass?" he said. "No." "You must have a boarding pass to load. I'm afraid you'll have to step off." "How could this be?" he said. "I have come so far, and my family, I must see them." But the captain had no mercy, and he refused to let poor Patrick onto the ship. He pled in his heart to God, "How can you lead me here so far, only to be rejected at this last moment? How close am I to my freedom?" And when the gangplank was about to be taken up, a sailor stepped out on it And he waved to Patrick. "Come on," he said. "Load. The captain has changed his mind. He wants you to join our crew." Patrick, thrilled, ran across the gangplank. It was taken up, and the ship sailed away to his freedom. Freedom at last. When he reached Great Britain, he carried on with the sailors to help them and the captain. And when they reached a very desolate, dry area that was scarce of food, the men were complaining and fighting with one another over the meager rations that they had. The captain was worried that his men were going to rise up in rebellion. But Patrick stood before them and he said, "Have confidence in God. With God nothing is impossible." Captain said, "If that's so, then why have him bring some food for us?" And all the men laughed and mocked Patrick. But Patrick took it very seriously. He prayed and fully expected God to give him an answer. The next morning, when they woke up, there was a herd of wild boar just mingling around their camp. All the sailors had all the meat that they wanted. So the captain, being happy with the help of Patrick, he helped him return to his family. And his parents were thrilled to see him. They hugged him and happy to know he was safe and sound. And of course, Patrick was much more appreciative of his quiet, peaceful country's lifestyle. How he loved to just sleep in a comfortable bed and have a warm meal cooked for him and have good company to talk with. But that is not the end of the story of Patrick. For many years later, someone came into his bedroom in the middle of the night. It was a stranger. Patrick was terrified. Was it the Irish coming to get him? He woke up. "Father, is that you? Who is it?" "Have no fear. I am Victor, your guardian angel, and I have come to give you another message." And he handed Patrick an envelope. And Patrick profusely thanked the angel for freeing him from bondage and returning him to his family. Then he opened the envelope, and the letter inside was addressed to him. "Dear Patrick," it read, "I am the voice of the Irish people. I plead and I beg you to return to us. Walk once more on our land again. For our hearts are being squoze and cinched up by monster snakes." And at that statement, Patrick woke up and the angel was gone. But Patrick's heart was terrified. He did not want to go back to Ireland. He did not get much sleep the rest of that night. And the next day, he kept thinking about the message that Victor had brought him. "How can I return to Ireland?" he said. "Those people are my enemies. They are everything in Ireland brings me memories of suffering and pain. I hate the Irish people. I will not go back to them. They can die from those venomous snakes, for all I care." But one day, while he was at church during the sermon, a thought occurred to him that although the Irish were his enemies, they were not God's enemies. He loved the Irish people, and he wanted to free them from the snakes. It occurred to Patrick that God had mercy on him. When he was in bondage, he heard his pleadings and prayers and freed him from the black raven birds and comforted him on cold nights. And Patrick thought, how can I turn my back on the Irish who are now pleading for me to help them? And so Patrick enrolled in a school to become a priest. And after many hard years of working, he became a bishop. And do you know where he was assigned? He was assigned to go to Ireland to teach the Irish people about God. Patrick was thrilled. He knew this was a calling from God. And he thought how wonderful it would be to teach the Irish who he knew would hear him and come to God and be so happy to be relieved of those awful snakes about their hearts. But it was not the way Patrick imagined. When he got to Ireland, the people rejected him. They would not listen to his message. They threw things at him, and they poured hot tar on his body and rolled him in feathers and then mocked him and laughed at him. They imprisoned him. They even tried to kill him. Things were even worse than when he was a slave there. But Patrick would not give up. He knew, and he could clearly see those horrible snakes that had such a firm grip on the Irish hearts. He taught the Irish about forgiveness, and he taught them about the warm, forever love of God. He told them that they could feel God's love in their hearts eternally, just like the evergreen clover mountain valleys of Ireland. And he picked these clovers up, and he taught them that just like the clover, who is one leaf but is divided into 3 leaflets, so is God one spirit, but can manifest himself into us in 3 different ways. And he taught them about faith, about hope, and about charity. And he served the poor and the needy. He performed many miracles. And on one occasion, he even rose a man from the dead. He served the Irish people for 30 years tirelessly, always remembering God's love in his own heart to keep him going. And finally, the snakes loosened their grip on their hearts. And over 1,000 people were baptized and believed in God. And like the 1,000 white doves that dispersed the black ravens many years ago on top of that ridge, all of these wonderful converts dispersed the snakes. The snakes slithered away, and that is why Ireland does not have snakes today. The people grew to love Patrick, and when Patrick died on March 17th, 461 AD, thousands of people came to his funeral, and he was honored as the first patron saint of Ireland. And even today, the Irish still remember St. Patrick. And in their homes, to remember his teachings, and they display the shamrock and the color green. The story of St. Patrick and the Monster Snakes by Stephen M. Cook.